Imagine growing up in a world where violence is the norm, where every day is a struggle for survival, and the concept of a loving family is nothing more than a distant dream. In such an environment, love is twisted into something sinister, a weapon used to control and manipulate rather than to nurture and support. Katherine Mary Knight, born and raised in such an environment, would become Australia's most infamous murderer. Her story is a chilling testament to the impact of a violent upbringing. From a young age, Katherine's life was marked by dysfunction. Her family was plagued by violence and instability, setting the stage for the horrors that would later unfold. Raised in a chaotic household, she witnessed and experienced abuse that would shape her future in terrifying ways. The constant exposure to violence left deep scars on her psyche, warping her understanding of relationships and love. Her fascination with knives began early, a chilling precursor to her later career as a butcher. This obsession with blades would become a dark thread running through her life, culminating in unspeakable acts of violence. She had a reputation for violence, a dark shadow that followed her through her troubled relationships. Friends and family often found themselves walking on eggshells around her, fearing her unpredictable outbursts. Enter John Price, a man who thought he had found love, only to be ensnared in Katherine's deadly web. Their relationship, which began with hope and promise, quickly descended into a nightmare. John Price, a hard-working and well-liked man, was initially charmed by Katherine's vivacious personality. However, it wasn't long before her darker side began to emerge. Their relationship was tumultuous, marred by constant arguments and threats. Katherine's violent tendencies became more pronounced, and John found himself trapped in a cycle of abuse. John tried to escape, even seeking restraining orders, but Katherine's grip was relentless. Despite his efforts to protect himself, he remained ensnared in her web of violence and control. The night of the crime remains one of the most horrifying in Australia's history. The events that unfolded were so brutal, they left an indelible mark on all who heard about them. Katherine attacked John with brutal precision, stabbing him repeatedly. The sheer ferocity of the attack was shocking, even to seasoned investigators. The gruesome aftermath shocked even the most seasoned police officers who discovered the scene. The brutality of the crime was almost beyond comprehension, leaving a lasting impact on all who were involved in the investigation. The crime was so horrific, it's almost beyond comprehension. The details of what Katherine did to John are too graphic to describe in full, but suffice it to say, it was an act of pure evil. Katherine's mental state was a focal point during the investigation. Her actions raised questions about her sanity and what could drive a person to commit such a heinous act. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a deeply disturbed mind, with diagnoses of borderline personality disorder and other serious conditions. These insights provided a glimpse into the darkness that drove her actions. The evaluations painted a picture of a woman whose mind was a battleground of conflicting emotions and violent impulses. Her trial captivated the nation, with every detail scrutinized. The public was both horrified and fascinated by the case, eager to understand how such a tragedy could occur. Katherine's defense struggled against the overwhelming evidence. Despite their efforts to portray her as a victim of her circumstances, the sheer brutality of her crime left little room for sympathy. Her historic sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole marked a first for women in Australia, a testament to the severity of her crime. It was a clear message that such acts of violence would not be tolerated. The aftermath of Katherine's crime sent ripples through the town of Aberdeen and beyond. The community was left reeling, struggling to come to terms with the horror that had unfolded in their midst. The media frenzy, public outrage, and lasting impact on the community were profound. The case sparked widespread debate about domestic violence and the need for better support systems for victims. This case remains a stark reminder of the potential for unchecked violence to escalate into unimaginable horror. It underscores the importance of early intervention and support for those affected by domestic violence. Katherine Mary Knight's story is a chilling tale of how a life marred by violence and untreated mental illness can spiral into one of the most disturbing acts in criminal history. Her case serves as a grim warning of the consequences of ignoring the signs of abuse and mental illness. It serves as a poignant reminder of the need to recognize and address the signs of domestic violence before it's too late. The importance of providing support and resources to those in abusive situations cannot be overstated. To truly understand the chilling actions of Katherine Mary Knight, we must delve into the dark and chaotic environment that shaped her from a young age. Born into a family riddled with dysfunction and violence, Katherine's early years were marred by instability and fear. Her father, Ken Knight, was an alcoholic who frequently terrorized the family with his violent outbursts. Her mother, Barbara, endured and sometimes reciprocated this violence, creating a toxic household where brutality was commonplace. This constant exposure to violence had a profound impact on young Katherine. She grew up believing that aggression was a normal part of life, a twisted lesson that would haunt her relationships in the future. Even as a child, Katherine exhibited troubling behavior. She was known for her explosive temper and had a penchant for lashing out violently at her peers. Her fascination with knives began in her early teens, an obsession that would later define her career and her crimes. She would often carry knives with her, using them to intimidate and control those around her. Katherine's troubled youth was further complicated by her tumultuous relationships. She sought out partners who, like her, were often damaged and volatile. These relationships were marked by intense passion, but also by frequent violence. Her work as a butcher allowed her to hone her skills with knives, a chilling precursor to the crimes she would later commit. The line between her professional and personal life blurred, with her violent tendencies seeping into every aspect of her existence. Katherine's early life was a perfect storm of abuse, neglect, and unchecked aggression. These factors combined to create a woman whose capacity for violence was both terrifying and tragic. Understanding her upbringing provides crucial context for the horrific acts she would later commit. It paints a grim picture of how a person can be shaped by their environment, with devastating consequences. This dark chapter of Katherine's life sets the stage for the unimaginable horror that would later unfold, a testament to the destructive power of a violent upbringing. The seeds of her future atrocities were sown in the chaos and brutality of her childhood, a chilling reminder of the long-lasting impact of domestic violence and abuse. As Katherine Mary Knight moved through her tumultuous life, one relationship stood out in its intensity and tragic conclusion: her relationship with John Price. John, a well-liked and respected man in his community, initially saw Katherine as a passionate and caring partner. However, the relationship quickly took a dark turn, marked by volatility and violence. Katherine and John's relationship began with a whirlwind of passion. Friends and family noticed how inseparable they were, but under the surface, trouble was brewing. Katherine's deep-seated issues and aggressive tendencies soon surfaced, leading to frequent and explosive arguments. John, like many before him, became a target of Katherine's violent outbursts. John Price, despite being a strong and resilient man, found himself caught in Katherine's web of manipulation and control. He endured physical and emotional abuse, which escalated over time. Katherine's jealousy and possessiveness knew no bounds. She would often threaten him with knives, a chilling reminder of her obsession and skill with these deadly tools. The warning signs were clear, but John, like many victims of domestic abuse, found it difficult to extricate himself from the relationship. He made several attempts to end things with Katherine, but each time her reaction was more extreme. Katherine's threats and violent behavior intensified, creating a climate of fear and uncertainty. In a desperate bid for safety, John sought restraining orders against Katherine. He confided in friends and colleagues about the terror he was living through, but the legal measures did little to deter Katherine. She continued to harass and intimidate him, her obsession with control driving her to increasingly dangerous lengths. John's attempts to protect himself were tragically unsuccessful. The escalation of violence was a clear indicator of the impending tragedy, but despite his efforts to seek help, the system failed to provide the protection he needed. Katherine's relentless pursuit and John's inability to escape her grasp set the stage for the horrific crime that would shock the nation. Understanding the dynamics of Katherine and John's relationship provides a crucial insight into the events leading up to that fateful night. It highlights the devastating impact of domestic violence and the urgent need for effective intervention and support for victims. The tragic end of John Price's life stands as a stark reminder of the lethal consequences of unchecked abuse. As the sun set on February 29, 2000, the small town of Aberdeen was unaware of the monstrous events about to unfold. That night, John Price returned home, unaware that it would be his last. Katherine Mary Knight, driven by an uncontrollable rage and a twisted sense of possession, was waiting for him. What transpired next was a scene of unimaginable brutality. In a frenzied attack, Katherine stabbed John Price multiple times with a butcher's knife. Each blow was delivered with terrifying precision and ferocity, a testament to her skill and her deep-seated rage. John fought desperately for his life, but the onslaught was relentless. After the initial attack, the horror escalated to a level that defied comprehension. Katherine, in a gruesome act of depravity, skinned John Price's body and hung his skin from a meat hook in the living room. The brutality did not end there. She meticulously decapitated him, and then, in a final macabre act, cooked parts of his body, preparing a meal intended for John's children. The following morning, when John Price failed to show up for work, his colleagues, already aware of the domestic turmoil he was enduring, became alarmed and contacted the police. What awaited the officers at John's residence would haunt them forever. As the police entered the home, the gruesome scene that greeted them was beyond anything they had ever encountered. The walls were spattered with blood, and the smell of cooked human flesh permeated the air. The officers were met with the sight of John's skin hanging grotesquely in the living room, his head boiling in a pot on the stove. The macabre meal set on the dining table was the final, horrifying touch. The impact on the officers was profound. Hardened by years of service, they were nonetheless deeply traumatized by the sheer brutality and inhumanity of the crime. Some would later describe the scene as the most disturbing and horrific of their careers, an image that would be forever etched in their minds. The discovery of John Price's body and the subsequent arrest of Katherine Mary Knight sent shockwaves through the community and the nation. It was a stark and chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity and the devastating effects of unchecked violence. As the details of that night came to light, the full extent of Katherine's brutality was revealed, leaving an indelible mark on all who learned of it. The case of Katherine Mary Knight remains one of the most horrifying and disturbing in Australia's history, a testament to the destructive power of rage and obsession. Understanding the mind behind such a horrific act requires delving into the psychological evaluations and expert opinions that emerged during the investigation and subsequent trial of Katherine Mary Knight. Her mental state was a focal point of both the defense and prosecution, as they sought to unravel what drove her to commit such an unspeakable crime. Katherine Knight's history of mental illness was well documented. She had a long history of violent outbursts and erratic behavior, which many of her friends, family, and previous partners had witnessed firsthand. Psychiatrists who evaluated her noted that she exhibited symptoms consistent with borderline personality disorder, BPD. This disorder is characterized by intense and unstable emotions, impulsive actions, and turbulent relationships. One of the key symptoms of BPD is a profound fear of abandonment, which can lead to extreme measures to avoid perceived or real separation or rejection. This fear could have played a significant role in Katherine's actions, as her relationship with John Price was fraught with tension and conflict. Her possessiveness and jealousy were well known, and these feelings may have been exacerbated by her mental health condition. In addition to BPD, Katherine was also diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, stemming from her traumatic childhood and abusive relationships. Her early exposure to violence and instability likely contributed to her later behavior, creating a cycle of abuse and aggression that she struggled to break free from. During the trial, forensic psychiatrists testified that Katherine's actions on the night of the murder were influenced by her severe mental health issues. They argued that her ability to control her impulses was significantly impaired, leading to a loss of control that culminated in the brutal slaying of John Price. However, not all experts agreed on the extent to which her mental illnesses affected her culpability. Some argued that despite her diagnoses, she was still fully aware of her actions and their consequences. The premeditation involved in the crime, such as preparing the butcher's knife and setting the macabre meal, suggested a level of planning and intent that contradicted the notion of an uncontrollable impulse. Ultimately, the court found Katherine Mary Knight guilty of murder, sentencing her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge described her crime as appalling and almost beyond contemplation in a civilized society. The case of Katherine Mary Knight highlights the complex interplay between mental illness and criminal behavior. While her diagnoses provided some insight into her actions, they did not absolve her of responsibility for the heinous crime she committed. Instead, they offered a glimpse into the troubled mind of a woman whose unchecked rage and obsession led to one of the most disturbing murders in Australian history. As we reflect on this case, it serves as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing mental health issues and the devastating consequences that can arise when they are left untreated. The story of Katherine Mary Knight is a chilling example of what can happen when the darkness within a person is allowed to fester and grow unchecked. The trial of Katherine Mary Knight was a legal spectacle that captured the attention of the entire nation. It was a case that not only shocked Australia, but also set a legal precedent, marking a dark chapter in the country's criminal history. From the outset, the prosecution presented a mountain of evidence against Katherine. The crime scene photos were so graphic and disturbing that they left an indelible mark on everyone who saw them. The prosecution detailed how Katherine had meticulously planned the murder of John Price, showcasing her premeditation and cold-blooded intent. The butcher's knife, the macabre meal prepared from Price's body parts, and the chilling note she left behind were all damning pieces of evidence that painted a horrifying picture of her actions. Katherine's defense team, on the other hand, focused on her long history of mental illness. They argued that her diagnoses of borderline personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder had severely impaired her ability to control her impulses. Expert witnesses testified that her mental state, exacerbated by years of abuse and trauma, had driven her to commit the unthinkable. They contended that she was not fully aware of her actions and their consequences due to her compromised mental health. Despite these arguments, the overwhelming evidence against Katherine was impossible to ignore. The prosecution highlighted her methodical preparations and the deliberate nature of the crime, which contradicted the defense's claims of an uncontrollable impulse. The jury was presented with a narrative of a woman who, despite her mental health struggles, knowingly and willingly executed a meticulously planned murder. The verdict was a historic one. Katherine Mary Knight was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, making her the first woman in Australia to receive such a sentence. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom as he described her crime as appalling and almost beyond contemplation in a civilized society. It was a sentence that reflected the sheer brutality of her actions and the lasting impact they had on the community. Katherine's case serves as a grim reminder of the potential for darkness within the human psyche and the importance of addressing mental health issues before they escalate into violence. Her story is a cautionary tale of what can happen when psychological disorders are left untreated and unchecked. As we conclude this journey into the life and crimes of Katherine Mary Knight, we are left to ponder the intersection of mental illness and criminal behavior, and the profound consequences that can arise when the two collide. The legacy of her actions continues to haunt those who knew John Price and the community of Aberdeen, forever changed by the horrors that unfolded on that fateful night. The trial and sentencing of Katherine Mary Knight sent shockwaves across Australia and beyond. The public and media reaction was one of utter disbelief and horror. News outlets covered every detail of the case, from the gruesome crime scene to the courtroom drama, with many struggling to comprehend the sheer brutality of Katherine's actions. Headlines screamed about the butcher of Aberdeen, and the story dominated the news cycle for weeks, leaving an indelible mark on the national psyche. In the small town of Aberdeen, the impact was profound and lasting. Residents who had once known Katherine as a neighbor and co-worker were left grappling with the realization that such a monstrous act could occur in their close-knit community. The town, forever associated with the heinous crime, saw a surge in curiosity seekers and media personnel, all eager to glimpse the place where the unimaginable had happened. The case also sparked widespread discussions about mental health and domestic violence in Australia. Katherine's background of abuse and her diagnosed mental illnesses highlighted the urgent need for better mental health support and intervention. Advocacy groups used the case to push for reforms and greater resources for those suffering from psychological disorders and those trapped in abusive relationships. Culturally, the case of Katherine Mary Knight has been referenced in various forms of media. True crime documentaries and podcasts have delved into the details of the murder, dissecting the psychological and societal factors that contributed to the tragedy. Books have been written, exploring both the factual events and fictionalized accounts inspired by the case. These adaptations serve as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human mind and the catastrophic consequences that can follow when it is left unchecked. As the years pass, the memory of John Price and the horror he endured remain etched in the collective consciousness of Australia. The story of Katherine Mary Knight stands as a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity and the critical importance of addressing mental health issues before they manifest in violence. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey into one of Australia's most disturbing true crime cases. Stay tuned for more deep dives into stories that uncover the darkest corners of the human mind.